Welcome to the Boston Art Podcast,
Boston's premier art podcast,
where we talk art, culture, and philosophy.
My name is Theodore Earthworms.
And I am Brian Huntress.
Welcome to the show.
Excellent. So, I guess if you guys are comfortable to begin recording.
Do you have any questions before we start? Like anything you want to...
How long will this take?
We can do
No, I don't have anything. I just want to know, like normally.
We usually do anywhere from, I guess maybe I should move here and Theo. We usually do like an hour, but we can do more or less. It doesn't,
So if we do 1 hour and we post that entire 1 hour, you don't do any editing.
I mean, unless, of course, if something came up, like, I accidentally set my address. Or something, we could cut out anything.
I called somebody out that's going to hate me for life now.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
We've had some of those.
Yeah.
And we put like an intro and outro on it. But we try not to chop it up too much so that we're not kind of editorializing what you say.
Right, and we kind of realized after a while that telling people, it's completely unedited is actually
hours long.
And it is actually kind of a scary, weird thing to say. Like, completely raw, unscripted.
I kind of like that, though, when you're explaining to us that it's basically just like eavesdropping on a conversation. Yeah. I kind of like that.
That's what we try to do.
It's a little more casual and loose.
Yeah. I mean, like Brian said, though, sometimes when you tell somebody that, they think that we're going to like character assassinate them or something. I think it's a very jarring thing to say, especially if you've never been on a podcast before. But I mean, I've never been on a podcast before, so
it's my first time. I'm very excited.
Awesome, welcome.
And thank you, by the way, for inviting us.
Of course, yeah.
Excited to be part of your podcast series.
I'm so excited to talk to you guys about your work. I'm very glad to. I know we spoke a while back. We were in a show together. Actually, a show Yolanda curated.
Yes.
Yeah. And we talked about it, but I mean, time got away from us, so I'm glad we finally are closing that loop.
Are you guys just going to hold this for the whole time?
Basically, we point them at you guys. So Theo's going to point that one at you. And then it's very
DIY.
It's very DIY, but...
That's cool.
Love
That's
it.
even better.
Yeah. And then we have these just in case.
Right. But yeah, so we're here to discuss your show at VA Shadows. We just pulled up to it actually on the way here just to make sure it was fresh in our minds. And there was it's honestly so beautiful because it's a very interesting gallery where it's, as we talked about on a previous episode, it's a very narrow, flat space. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what you would call that. Is it a room or a hallway?
They call it a room, but it's, like you said, it's like maybe 4 feet deep by half a block long.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. When we looked at it first, when Yolanda suggested or threw out the call for people to do it, I took a look at it and I was like, oh boy, I don't know, because it's so long and so skinny. But then maybe I'm jumping ahead too far. But then I met Yutong and she came for a studio visit and started giving me all these amazing ideas to think about. And I was like, I think we could do this. So.
That's exciting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes an unusual space or unusual prompt makes the best ideas happen, I think.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Exactly. I feel like this space, both in terms of its conception and it's a concept and also it's a physicality make it a very unique space.
Yeah.
It is behind VA Shadows, we know it has a very particular and special important mission. Mm-hmm. And as we say, it's right in the middle of Harvard Square. It's lots of traffic. People just come and go every day. And also it's 24/7, so you can go anytime. So
which is one of the
it's
one of I think really cool parts, because if you're up and about at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, you can go take a look at it. And in fact, I think it's more interesting at night, because during the day, if it's a sunny day, it's kind of hard to see because the windows are really big and reflective.
Yeah, that's what I have been telling people, try to go when it's dark. So you can see all the light and everything.
And it's thematic, the night studio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's got to be over 50 paintings? It's many paintings in there.
I think it ended up being maybe around 73 or so. We brought more and actually ended up cutting some of them. So, and this is totally different from, not that you guys would necessarily know this, but I just had a show from January and February at Praise Shadows, and that show had 85 pieces, and this is completely different work from that work. So
that's crazy.
And my studio still has probably about 150 pieces still on the walls too. So
you must work really fast then.
I do. I also just work a lot. I'm just I always just want to be in my studio. So like after work, I go down and work. My studio is where I live.
Yeah.
So it's easy when I come home from work. I can just go down the steps and go into my studio and work if I have a few hours, and then all weekend. Like, so normally right now I would totally be in my studio working or whatever. So yeah, it's great. So whenever I'm free, I'm down there.
That's cool. That's awesome.
And speaking of the studio too, the theme of the show, the title is completely slipping my mind, but it is
Night studio.
Night Studio. It's a portrait of an artist's studio.
Yeah.
So are a lot of the paints and materials and the books and the brushes, that's all your stuff?
It's all my stuff. So again, one of the things when Yutong came to do a studio visit, she looked at my desk and she's like, "Oh, this is great. Like, we should think about a way to incorporate this stuff." And then my mind like just started thinking. And so, yeah, that's all actual brushes and containers that I put water in. I even brought the paint rag I was using at the time, all my sketchbooks, not all of them, but there's probably like, I don't know how many we ended up with, but maybe like 10 or 15 sketchbooks are in there. Just all my crap, like boxes of little pieces of wood and stuff that I use for the frames, and
the iPod. I love the iPod.
so this is funny because I have a super old one, like maybe the 3rd generation one or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the one I'm going to bring because I don't even use it anymore. And so
So
I'm like,
cool.
that way if like something happens to it, I won't care. So
I love how like thick it is, though. It stood out to me. I was like,
I
that's
know.
awesome.
You're like, what is that big thing? I know. It's so funny. Yeah, I thought it would be because again, another thing. I'm calling out all Yutong's great ideas, but
Yeah.
she suggested to do a Spotify playlist. And
Oh, cool.
again, I was
Yeah.
like, wow, I didn't even think about that. And because music for me is like such a big part of my work. Like I always listen to music when I work, and I think that happened because some of my older studios. I'm from the Midwest originally, and some of my older studios were in places where there were businesses, and so. Like one of my first studios was I had my own room and a door, but it shared the space with a futon making company. So outside of my space were people with these giant like paddles, like banging cotton fibers to get them like even in the thing. It's just like boom, 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 and I'm just like, I can't take this. And so I just like got headphones and listened to music, and ever since then.
That's super funny.
What state was it?
In Wisconsin.
Wow.
Yeah, I was
Well,
in
that's pretty
Madison
far
at
out
the
there.
time. Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. So it kind of started there, and now
Yeah.
it's become such a part that I don't always listen to music, but I would say 90% of the time I do. So
Yeah.
it kind of becomes like, I was talking to Yolanda the other day, and she was asking a little bit about it, and I kind of think of it as like another tool, like the paints or the pencils or collage or glue or paint or whatever, but, you know, so.
Helps focus, I think, sometimes
Yeah.
to have that noise that you're in control of.
And if you're like listening to a certain type of music, it gets you in a certain kind of like mood or emotion or whatever. So if you like are feeling super hyper, then maybe I want to listen to that kind of music. If I'm feeling super mellow, then maybe I want to listen to something that will, help strengthen that feeling a little bit. So I just kind of whatever.
Right. We were looking at the playlist actually when we were at the gallery earlier, and I noticed some Wilco on there. Like
Yeah.
kind of
It's all over the place.
Yeah. It has some, like, you can see the connection, though, to some of the work that's in the show, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I know that's probably the point. But
Yeah. I mean, the music, if you look at it, it's just like literally almost all genres.
Yeah.
And it just, like my father, when I grew up, he's totally into classical music, and so he would have my sister and I like listen to little pieces and stuff like that. And so at the time, of course, we hated it because we were kids and we just wanted to like listen to what we wanted to listen to. But as I got older, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, it just opened up a whole nother world to me.
Very cool.
Yeah, so it's literally all over the place. Like,
Yeah.
people are probably going to be like, what is wrong with this guy?
Yeah, so when I did a studio visit with Brett, we were looking at all these paintings, small boxes, and then I asked, do you have any like sketchbook you can show me? So he took like a bunch of sketchbooks. There was one little notebook. He wrote down lots of like words, small sentence. So I was asking him like, where do those things come from? That's when he told me it's all from the music I listened to while I was working at the studio. So I thought that's kind of like very important part of artistic process. And also we show as a night studio show, the first window like on the desk, there are lots of sketchbook, and there was one with the word arrival. So that's one example, like to show how the music influenced her work. So his work. So I would think, okay, maybe we should just do a Spotify. Actually, I got the idea from many years ago when I worked at MFA, when we did a Basquiat show. We also have a Spotify list. I feel that's a really great way to really engage people.
That's really cool. That is
It's
cool.
funny, I worked on that show as well, but I don't think we ever crossed our paths.
Yeah.
But I
That's
actually
crazy.
installed like the objects and things, like that amazing, I don't know if you guys got to see it when it was up, but the Rommelzy like full body armor piece in the last
Yeah.
room, like I got to help install that. It was just like
So that was the Basquiat show that was down underneath the.
Yeah.
Okay, that was like 2022 or very
it
pretty
happened,
recently,
so
right?
we set it up right just before the pandemic, and then it basically got shut down.
Oh, I
for
remember
like
that.
those 5 months, and then I think they got permission to extend the show.
Yeah, I think like the museum closed the day everything arrived in the gallery. That's the first day of
wow.
installation.
Yeah.
The show was supposed to travel to Perez Museum in Miami, but that didn't happen because everything in the show like was borrowed from collectors,
Right.
other institutions, so we can extend for a certain time, but you can like keep extending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So were they all just in that gallery during the closure?
I
In
think
crates,
so.
in crates.
That's
Most of them
crazy.
weren't unpacked yet. So yeah, Yutong's right. I mixed that up, but it was all the stuff had arrived, but we hadn't begun installing yet. So then
Wow.
it just sat in the crates for like 5 months.
That's such a sad mental image, just like the stasis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
What a crazy time.
And we thought it was going to create havoc with the show, that like we did all this work, like preparatory work, like making mounts and stuff like that. And we thought, which is what I do at the MFA. And we thought, oh, the show was going to just get canceled and go to the next venue, but they worked it out so we could still have the full exhibition.
It was a great exhibition too.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it went on.
I mean, everybody loves Basquiat, but some of the other people, especially Rommelzy, I knew about his work because I'd read about him, but his stuff was just like blew me away. It's just like so good and
Yeah.
like just such a different take on that whole 80s kind of atmosphere and everything.
Yeah, it's also like very multimedia, and also I think what's important about that show, which we should focus on our show for this podcast. I'm gonna say this: so it didn't really just show Basquiat himself. It shows a group of people who are working together with him at that very important moment in
Right.
New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Theo,
I was
please.
just gonna ask, for that show, were you on the curatorial team for that?
Yes. So
Cool. Very cool.
That's actually why I moved to Boston. I just graduated from college,
Yeah.
and then I got a curatorial internship as a contemporary art department MFA. And then my supervisor left, so I got like a very temporary full time. So jobs I was working on that show as a curatorial assistant.
That's really cool. That's awesome.
I feel like a lot of curators find themselves, or I guess how most people think of curators is somebody selecting and hanging a series of paintings or sculptures. But I feel like in both the shows, the MFA and this one, they're very multimedia. I guess I'm curious as to like, do you feel like that's a curatorial style for you to be incorporating music and installation and the art itself?
I think so. I mean, if you look at the structure of the curatorial departments and institutions, always either by geographic area, like East Asian art department, European art department, or by medium, like painting and drawing, sculpture, or photography department.
Printmaking.
So like it works that way for a purpose because each curator has their own specialty. But what we often, so my specialty is contemporary art and also photography. But for contemporary art, I think curator tends to be more interdisciplinary because there's just lots of contemporary artists working with different media together. And I think what I learned from working on Basquiat show is really how to engage with community and really how to think, because including design, Spotify list, everything, that's something beyond exhibition, but it's also part of exhibition that makes the exhibition even better. So I think we really should, when we curate a show, we really think about everything that could help to make this show better.
Yeah. I mean, our current director, Matthew Titlebaum, I mean, that's one of his like major things is he wanted to make not only the art community, but just the community that is physically around the museum feel like they are welcome and that they can come. And so that's when we also started doing all the after hours, like late nights and all those kinds of things, so that young people can go and see, like, you don't have to be scared to come here. Like, you can come and just, like, enjoy and just have fun. And you don't have to know anything about art to come in and enjoy it. And so I think our directors really, I think it is an admirable task to try to open it up and make it feel welcome to everybody. And in fact, I think that's one of our slogans, isn't it? Open to all, or all are welcome, or something
like that. Yeah.
And they're really, honestly, I have to say that they are really trying to do that. So.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame too that some people don't feel welcome, because art, to me at least, my definition is it's just supposed to be something like awesome.
Yeah.
Just something that looks really cool.
Yeah.
That's it. You know.
And you don't, and like, just like, you know, I don't know everything. I've been making art and been involved in that world my whole adult life, and I don't know everything about all artists. And so I just, whatever attracts me or is cool or it piques my interest, I go and look at it, and then I'll read about it, learn about that artist later on. So I don't know everything either. I just love going and being inspired and be like, wow, that's so cool, and learning about new people. And
Yeah.
But also, I feel like it's also not surprising that people feel they don't belong there or they feel scared. For example, like, especially like an institution like MFA is such a monumental museum, encyclopedic, and so all the buildings looks really amazing. So and also tickets are expensive too. So I feel like it makes sense for people to feel like scared, don't belong there, especially for like for some underrepresented groups, they don't see themselves represented there, so that makes them feel even more, okay, there is nothing about me, about my family, like my group. So I think that makes sense. So that's why I feel like right now, like, so many institutions in the States are really trying to really push that to make people feel welcome. And also I feel that's why for groups and collective like Behind VA Shadow, why that is very important, because for that group, they're also trying to support a very specific group that's also overlooked by institution, which is artists who work at the institution, who work in the art world, but they don't necessarily get like opportunity to show their own artistic side. So I think so all those kinds of initiative and groups are very important.
Yeah.
Right.
And one thing, go ahead, please.
One thing I was going to just say, piggybacking off what Yutong said about Behind VA Shadows, is that another thing I think people don't understand is usually when they think of artists, they think that they're just able to do their work full time and that's how they support themselves. And there are so many of us, as we all know probably here, that we all have full-time jobs. And so my big thing about, and the show, in fact, that we were in together, the thing I really wanted to stress was that, you know, like in this case, the MFA is where I work, so they get the best part of my day. Like, they get the part of my day when I'm well rested and my brain is functioning great. And, and I need that job because you need to pay your rent and you need health insurance and all that stuff. And then when I get home, as soon as I leave, I always think in my head, that's when my day actually starts, and I go into the studio, and then that's the part that I'm excited about. And that's the part that you do when you're tired and you're exhausted and you've already worked 8 hours, and now you're going to go work another 8 hours because you're very passionate about it. So I think that's the beautiful thing about Behind VA Shadows, is I think that they're really stressing that kind of, like we talked about a little bit before we started, that, you know, just it's shining a light on all of these people that are not blue chip artists, that are just everyday people, but that are also artists too.
That's true. It's really exciting to see that there's so much traction happening behind this project too. Like, the gallery in Harvard Square is so exciting because it is so accessible. It's so accessible to foot traffic, and it kind of reaches out into a community that might not be aware of this issue to say, like, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing, and this is the art that we make, which is just so exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, and I'm so happy to have. I've found Yolanda through Paul McAlpine, who we were talking about earlier, and so and then Yolanda introduced me to Yutong, and that's how we met. So it's just like all of a sudden I'm like meeting all these great people.
This is actually not how we met.
What's that?
So this is not actually how we met.
How did we meet?
No, I think I know you like a long time before this, because I work at Praise Shadows Art Gallery while I was in school at Boston University. That's where I got my master in art history. So while I work at Praise Shadows, before I went to ICA, the last show I work on is a Little Windows. It's a small group show where you're in it.
Okay.
But I think we didn't meet in person because you drop off the word while I was not in the gallery.
Okay.
And then I think I left before that show opened.
Okay, that must be why.
So, so I know
So you were
that
there,
for
but not
really
when I
long
was there,
time.
Right.
physically. Anyway.
So yeah, so when Yolanda and I were talking to how we can work together, so I said to her, there's one artist I really want to work with, and that's Brett. And he said, yes. She said, I want to work with him too. So that's how we start to talk. And
That's so
everything.
cool.
I did not know that. That's awesome. I just learned something new today.
How did you meet Yolanda?
I think from a common friend. Her name is Nemo. Yutong Shi. She's a person who has been writing all the press release for the Behind VA Shadows. And how Nemo and I met is we were interned together at MFA Boston.
Oh, cool.
At Contemporary Art Department in 2019.
That's awesome. It's crazy how small the arts community in Boston is. I feel like if you wait long enough in the community, everybody eventually meets each other.
That's true. Very true.
Yeah, which is fun. It leads to some awesome collaborations like this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask earlier that's really cool about VA Shadows is that it's a group prioritizing not just artists working in museums, but also the curatorial aspect, where in my experience, a lot of art collectives are just artists, and they're not, maybe it's because they don't know that it would be so helpful to incorporate and include curators, but I guess it's like, to me, it seems really unique that it's like very much a 50-50 collective, because it's not for money, it's to empower artists and curators. So I guess that isn't really a question, but I guess I wanted to ask you too is, do you find it like... Oh my God, I'm completely bombing this question.
You're doing
but
great.
I guess I'm just interested in what it's like to be curating and working on curatorial teams in a setting like the MFA compared to doing it with VA Shadows.
Yeah, it's definitely different. That's a really good question. Something I really want to talk about how we conceptualize and form this show is. So Brett mentioned earlier, he just had a show in January at Praise Shadows Art Gallery. So we were thinking, he just had a show and we're having another show. How can we make it different? And that's why I also very much like this space. Is first, it is not an institution space. And second, it is not a commercial art gallery space. So if it's an institution, I feel like you have this burden or even baggage of all this great prestiginess. It also has certain institution value, certain institutional narrative you kind of have to align yourself with. And also if it's a commercial art gallery, then you have to sell works. That's how commercial art gallery works. But for our space, you don't have any of that. So that means you can literally do whatever you want. So for me personally, I feel like whenever I do a show, I tend to make this an opportunity for artists to experiment with what he has been wanting to do for a very long time, but either didn't get the opportunity or didn't get a chance. So what's the difference to do a show in this space or the institution or commercial art gallery is you don't have those kind of restriction and burden. You are like 100% free. So that's the first difference. And second difference, so I think whenever you do show, there are two really important things. First is money, and second is the place. So the place is different, which I have just said, but the second element is money. We don't have any money. We all volunteer our time. So what's different to do a show in the institution or commercial gallery is we don't have that kind of support. So we don't have preparators. We don't have for example, if you do a show in MFA Boston, you have whole marketing team. You have a whole development department. You have press, everything. You have publication department, so we don't have all of that. So we kind of do it ourselves. I designed the poster, we wrote the exhibition blurb together, and Nemo did the press release. So we don't have time, we don't have that money support, so it's more collaborative. We are more just really trying to be really creative to try to realize a show. So I think that's the two major difference, which are both good and pros and cons, but I think artists and curator just trying to make things work under like whatever condition.
Right. It sounds more labor intensive, but also a lot more creative. Like more free, really creative.
It's definitely not a very traditional space, which so that's again while we're conceptualizing exhibition, we were really trying to take advantage of all those different elements of the space.
I mean, that's one of the things that really attracted me to wanting to do this, was that both Yutong and Yolanda were saying that you should just do what you want to do and just like have fun. It sounds like a really simple, stupid thing, but I was like, yeah, we should just have fun with that. And so that was like the really attractive part about it.
That's exciting. I feel like in contexts like this, sometimes if someone gives you that opportunity, like we kind of had that experience with Landscape of Our Minds, which is the other show that Yolanda curated, we were both in, where I remember I DM'd Yolanda beforehand and was asking about like hanging preparation or something, or like how I should, because I had a piece that was on raw canvas. I was like, how should I deal with this? She was like, well, what do you feel like you want to do? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm allowed to do that? It's like an overwhelming and really exciting opportunity to actually just do what feels right.
Yeah.
You don't usually get that, especially in gallery spaces.
Yeah, especially in institutions where every space is like temperature and humid control, and so you have more restrictions.
And also, like in a big institution like at the MFA, the other big thing is compromise. Like people have to compromise all the time, and so like because I work so closely with the curators, because I basically work with every department in the museum, and they all have a very like strong idea about what they want to do, and then as you get like all the realities that Yutong is talking about, like money and time and factors and how many people can be involved in all that, then they have to slowly start to compromise here and there until it can like fit into the museum's like vision of what it needs to be. So a lot of compromise, and I feel like for here, I don't feel like I had to compromise anything. Just we're free to do whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
It's like so accessible that you don't even need to go in. You can just stand outside and see right in. So
awesome.
The curation of the space too is really welcoming. Like the desk, and it's kind of like a behind the scenes peek into the work that you see when you walk a little further down, like the second and third windows, which I think is really cool considering it's a space where there's no gallery greeter, there's no staff. Like you can be there, like you said, at like 2 a.m. But it's kind of like you're welcomed in, even though you can't even enter the room.
yeah, and another thing too that I think is very cool about it is it's a really mysterious setting, because the first thing you see, I guess if you're maybe coming from the square or whatever, is the desk, this installation where you're imagining this artist working and these very real, human, real world objects. Then you look at the art, and it's surreal. There's planets and UFOs and stuff like that, which is like, I don't know, it kind of makes it feel like kind of magical, like it was. And you don't see you. You're not in the glass, right? You are in a sense, but I don't know. I guess that's a pretty good segue, I guess, because I was really curious about some of the things you actually painted, which we were observing a lot of tentacles or creatures. Or could you talk about some of the symbolism that you used?
Sure. So I guess just to kind of start in the Wayback Machine, which when I was in school, in graduate school, I went to school at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and I studied with a landscape artist, Tom Utek, who is still alive and very active. And he paints like Quetico Park and North Woods, Canada, kind of places that are reserved for, you can go in and camp, but you have to bring everything back. Everything you take in, you bring back with you. And so he's really interested in painting that kind of disappearing landscape, but his ideas, he wants to do it all from his memory, so he doesn't really do drawings or take photographs or anything for paintings. He just takes it all in and then goes back to his studio, and so he does like 1 or 2 trips a year or whatever. He's elderly now, so I don't know that he goes anymore, but he just does it all from his memory. And so that really stuck with me, because your brain kind of acts like a filter in a way. So whatever you take in, once it goes through your filter, it helps it to make it you more, if you know what I mean. So I'm very heavily influenced by landscape, and so of course that the landscape I live in, like I'm on the East Coast now, in Maine and all those places, so they really influence me. But also when I was a kid, and still I'm interested in like all the old like monster movies and stuff. Like I would sit in my bedroom on Saturday nights, and they had this local station that would do like monster movies, horror movies every night, not like Saturday night, and I would sit in my room and watch those every Saturday night. I just like loved it so much, like the old crappy black and white ones, you know.
Yeah.
And so that is also adding to this, and of course I'm totally into science fiction and all that stuff too. And so all that dropped away for a long period, for maybe a few years, and then it started to come back in, and I just let it, because I'm like, why not? I'm not making a living from these paintings, so why not like just let it take me where it wants me to go. And so the tentacles and the UFOs and all are all things I'm interested in. Like the UFOs, like I've never seen one personally. I would love to, but you know, and watching, I don't know if you've heard of this program called Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. Like they've created this whole like kind of, I don't buy into it, but I love how they've created this whole like kind of alternative universe, like history.
It's like a mythology.
Yeah, exactly. But they go to such like amazing lengths to like kind of repaint history so that it works in their kind of format that I just love that idea. And that's Praise Shadows was a lot about that. It was called #DutchFakes, and so it was me kind of taking kind of the quote unquote golden age, which wasn't the golden age for most people, but for the wealthy it was. And so it was taking that period of like high science and study and mathematics and art and just putting my kind of Ancient Aliens twist on it. And so I had created like a secret space program, which of course could not have happened, you know, in the 17th century or whatever. So, but I, you know, just things like that. So I was having fun like playing around with that. And so in this work that you're seeing in Night Studio, it's the same kind of thing. I'm really interested in the landscape, but then the kind of younger Brett wants to come out too, and so like the tentacles and things, it just helps me to make it more mysterious but also powerful. And I'm also trying to get people to like do a double take, so when they look at my work they're like, oh wow, is that a UFO, or is that like, what is that tentacle, is that a sea creature, what is that? And I just want people to like, I want to try to catch people off guard a little bit and maybe just make them stop for a second or two and look at it and just like maybe think about the landscape in a different way. And so that's kind of like what all that stuff is about. And again, the reality is I've never seen a UFO. Probably they exist, but I've never seen one. And the same thing with the tentacles. I've never actually seen that, but boy, would I love to see that.
And they're out there somewhere in the ocean.
Mean, you know, like even just like, so it's crazy, but in Chelsea where I live and where my studio is, I'm a runner, so I go running a lot, and it's called Chelsea Creek. It's right by the salt piles there. And sometimes there's seals going in and out of that, and it's not even, by the time you get there, it's kind of like brackish water. It's not even necessarily seawater anymore, but it's like, it just like throws you off. You're like running along in the middle of the city and there's a seal like humping. I'm like, it's crazy.
Yeah, like why are you here?
Yeah. And so I love that kind of thing, to be like caught off guard like that. And so that's one of the things I'm really interested in trying to do in my work, is to just try to get people to catch them off guard, take them out of this world for maybe a second or two and just think about it in a different way.
I really love too the specific painting style too. Is it inspired by those older Golden Age works? Because it kind of has like a Voynich manuscript feeling to it.
So I do love, like, I get what you're saying. Like, I love, so part of the reason I use those old boxes and everything is I love that they look old, if you will. And so for me, the box thing is, it already comes kind of like with an implied history, and so I love that part of it. And so by melding my paintings with that, it makes them feel older. And so, in fact, the boxes and frames are so important to me that I actually make those before I make the paintings.
Really,
so,
you're making.
So I'm kind of doing the opposite. Like normally, as an artist, like, right, you make your painting and then you frame it later. But I actually make the box first, the frame. Well, I call them boxes because that's technically what they are. But I make the frame first and then make the painting to like work within that, because I want them to be like one cohesive thing, so that they have to be together. Like you can't separate them, because if you do, then the painting won't work without the frame, and the frame won't work without the painting. So, and I feel like that's probably what's giving it that kind of older. Kind of like look, which is I love. And then the painting itself, like mostly I use gouache, which is like an opaque watercolor, but I do occasionally use acrylic too. And I've been using that gouache painting since graduate school. It was just, I'd never really got comfortable with oil painting. Like I could use it, but I could never get the effects I wanted technically. So I started trying out gouache, and I was like, oh wow, this is amazing, because you can like, I do it very untraditionally though, by the way. Like I actually build up. So like I start with a paper panel, and I basically build up like 4 or 5, 6 layers of paint on it before I even start, so that there's not that white kind of blank canvasy thing. It's already like, it already looks crusty and crappy, and so you don't, there's no like hesitation to just go in and like do stuff. And then the other great thing about it is that you can both add to it, but you can subtract too, so you can very like carefully go back down through all the layers. And so it just gives you like all these things you can do while you're painting. And I think that kind of weird built up layers of all the gouache is also making it feel like it's a little bit older. And probably also the scale. I tend to work mostly smaller, like what I call like domestically scaled, just for practical reasons, but also because I'm really interested in making work that people could have in their homes, especially if you live in a city like Boston where everybody has little tiny apartments. Like what are you going to do with like a 10-foot canvas? You can't put it anywhere. So it's that, I mean, that's not a major reason, but it's one of the reasons. So I think all those things maybe together are helping to make them feel a little bit older or kind of quote unquote historic or whatever.
I wonder too if that the perspective of trying to incorporate the frame into the finished piece, do you think that perspective led into your pursuing mount making, or do you think the mount making is feeding into that collection of work?
Interesting question. I think the mount making, the actual work, although I hate to say this, but I'm saying it, I think you're right. I think the mount making probably led to this. And because some of the pieces do have actual like little mounts, like what I do at work, I make them at home to hold like the little, I call them finials, but the little sculptural things that are on the frame or hanging off it or on the top of it. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think probably the work, the mount making that I do at work probably has informed that.
That's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
I
it's definitely made them more sculptural too. So because normally they didn't used to have that much kind of stuff on them. Like if you go see the show, there's other pieces of wood and there's things on the top and the sides, and one or two in here have doors even and things like that. So
we were going to ask you about the spheres on the boxes. Does that have symbolism to it too, or is it just an aesthetic feature?
It started as an aesthetic. They're actually very unglamorous. They're actually crappy old croquet balls that I get in antique stores and stuff. And being a mount maker, basically I wrote out a hole in the top, and then from the inside I mechanically attach it with a big screw that goes through the inside of the box and then into the croquet ball. So you could actually like pick them up by the ball if you wanted to. So that's like where the work comes in. Like it's not just glued on; they're actually mechanically attached so that it's very like stable. But there must be in my mind, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head like what the symbolism is, but that's part of what we talk about in the kind of description that Yutong and I wrote together. It's just search, like all the work I'm doing is searching. I don't know what it is, and maybe when I find it, that'll be the end. I don't know, but it's these things I keep going back to over and over again. And I say in the thing, maybe that's what the real end result is, that you just keep going back to these same, like the search is maybe the reason for making the paintings. But initially it's just really aesthetic. Like it looks like it could be interesting. It's a certain scale that will work in the scale I work, and I think I like them to look unusual. Like I don't want them to look like everybody else's work, and so there's part of that too. Like I want them to look like it's me. So I think that's part of it too. So, but I also like both the paintings and the frames to be open-ended enough that you could come with your own interpretation of what you think that should be. Like I don't want it. Like you've asked a bunch of questions, and this is exactly what I want. Like I don't want it to be so specific that like, oh, this 1, 2, 3, and that's it, and I'm done. I get it. Like I want it to be kind of mysterious and have people come back and or go home and think about it and think about like what does that mean and why are these things together.
Yutong, I'm curious, were there any connections or themes that you found in the show that Brett didn't intend or observe on his own? Like as the curator, where there's like kind of an selecting the works.
I feel like our working style were like pretty collaborative. We discuss everything. But I feel like lots of things kind of changed during the install. I feel like lots of great ideas happened while we were installed. So I feel like the show ended up becoming something like even better that we both expected.
I agree completely.
But lots of things I feel like lots of things started with our studio visit. Like for example, like the idea to bring his studio into the space. The idea that we should pick the symbols of UFO, spaceship, because he just had a show at Pre-Shadow Art Gallery, which is titled Dutch Fake. So I thought we should do something like not completely different, but should be different enough. And I'm also very interested in space UFOs, those kind of things. And also this is a 24/7 place, so it adds to that. I think, what else? I think it's probably for the second window while we're trying to do the installation. That's something I thought about is, so Brett's work is very like object based. Like his small painting with those boxes and frames are already very sculptural, but you see them always installed on the wall. So I thought that's also why I observed at his studio. So if you ever visit his studio, you will find all those works everywhere in his place, not on the wall, but also stacked on the table. So that's why I was like, oh, maybe like, because if you think about artist practice, it's always like an evolving practice. I think for artists, like you're an artist, I'm an artist, but you probably know this better than me. You probably always think, okay, what's the next stage? What's the next step? Like, where should I go for the next body of work? So I feel like, okay, so if those works are already so sculptural, so object-based already, why can't we do an installation? Can we do like a bigger installation, buy all those small objects? This is one thing we could do in a non-commercial space, because normally it's hard to sell installation work. So I think commercial art galleries tend to do more wall-based thing. So I think that's something we talked about. And also, like, while we were install those objects on the window in the middle, like the group of things that's like immediately in front of the window. So we did it diagonally, so it feels like they're marching towards somewhere. That's something I really like, because that's exactly how Brett stacked those boxes at his studio. So I feel like that adds on to this very mysterious feelings to the space. It feels like if you go see the show at night, you might feel like all those small objects become alive. They're going marching towards somewhere.
Which I absolutely love, that kind of thinking. Like, that's the thing I hope that people can bring to it, like exactly what Yutong said. Like, that is very rewarding to me, because that's exactly what I want people to come and do. But I should also say that part in the middle window that Yutong is talking about, that actually ended up being like one of my favorite parts, because it's not something we discussed ahead of time. It's something that she started thinking about while we were installing, and I'm like, oh yeah, let's try it, and it just like looked amazing. So, and also for me, like, this was, as far as I can recall, this is the first time I ever worked with a curator. And so at first, when the idea was thrown around, I was like, oh, I'm not sure, whatever, but it was absolutely an amazing experience. And she made me think about my own work in such a different way that part ended up being really rewarding too. So like, for my first experience working with a curator, it was like A++. It was amazing. So thank you, Yutong.
It's really a great working experience.
Yeah. I think we really gelled and hit it off and had similar sensibilities. So yeah.
That's great. That's the dream scenario, right?
Yeah, oh my god, absolutely. Yeah.
Also, Yolanda is also very supportive.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, Yolanda always says, and maybe she said it in some of your other podcasts, but she's very humble, but she's like, my job is just to facilitate and get the right people together and give you the like space you need to just like go do your thing. Like,
right.
She always says that, and it's not untrue, but she obviously does much more than that. But
yeah.
That's what I think she would tell you about behind VA Shadows.
I think she literally did tell us that. Actually, so that's right. Yeah, we were talking about on the way here that it's definitely different from my experience, but I've been seeing more and more these kind of calls for proposals or shows that are a curator-artist duo, and I haven't really seen that before. That might be just because of what I've done or something, but I'm curious, do you guys feel like this is a newer thing that people are looking to see in shows, like the meeting of minds of curator and artist, or do you feel like this is something unique to VA Shadows?
I mean, for me personally, it was brand new, but I think Yutong can speak much better to the curatorial part of it.
I think this probably, I don't think this happens that often outside of Behind Veiled Shadows. Normally, but what I do witness is there are more and more curators, like artist curators. Like artists start to curate their own show. I feel like curator and artists have a very different perspective, but also, of course, different curators really have very, very different working style. But I think artists as curators, they tend to be more experimental, more creative, because they know the work very well, and they tend to more focus on the material and process. So I feel like curators, I mean, there are also very different kinds of curators, like institutional curators, gallery curator, independent curator. People do think very differently. I feel like we should probably care less about title, but some more like what you do during the process and how you work as a team together.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I really think it's a cool thing to see these like calls for curators or like pairing of individuals, because it is a different philosophy. Like it depends on your practice as curator, but I think artists, having been on both sides of that, when you're curating, you're thinking more about the space or the exhibition on a whole versus individual pieces. And I think when you're making art, like I tend to be so dialed into whatever piece I'm working on that the body of work sort of happens as I go. Like I'm not thinking from a macro point of view. So having the macro and the micro in the same space adds a layer of depth, especially if there's either party has like an art history perspective or any additional context. So I think it's really nice to see that kind of rich layering of specialties in these collaborative shows. So I hope it continues.
I mean, I think you've hit it exactly on the head, at least for me. Like I was so in the micro that when Yutong came and was looking at the macro, I was like, wow, she's like opening up my mind to my own work.
Right.
So from my vantage point, it's exactly what you said happened.
Yeah, I think it's always great to have a curatorial perspective. It doesn't matter if it's that curatorial perspective is from a curator or artist friend. I think it's a different perspective than really looking at the work individually, because I think exhibition as a form of art itself, because it works very differently. Sometimes exhibition has its own narrative, like Night Studio. We kind of actually have a story like going out from the first window, second window to the third window. So it starts with that studio space. It's very quiet, it's very comfy. So it kind of gives you an in to look into an artist's working space where the actual work actually happens. So that's some kind of thing I really want to show people, because you normally don't see that kind of setup at institution or commercial art gallery. So that's from my curatorial perspective, that's how we can take advantage of this space. But the second reason why we do that, like beyond the very artistic reason, is people love behind the scene. So they will make more people want to come.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a different perspective too. Yeah, and also the narrative I talked about. So the first window is the kind of start of the story, like where the actual work happened, and then we move to the middle window. So that's where the installation happened. That's kind of like experiment. That's kind of where the object become alive. And then when we move to the third window, we return to a more polished and a traditional regular gallery setting, so you can see like a more finalized, polished presentation. And then there also, I feel like there are lots of like details and like small things we design intentionally. For example, you can see on the very last window, like the triptych, we are like kind of echoing the moon painting on the first window, and also like the, what do you call the mailbox?
The mailbox.
Not the mailbox. What do you call it? So there's one small work we put like above your chair.
Oh yeah, it's just like a little, I don't even know what it was.
What do you
Just
call
it's a little box from an antique store that has a little door with like a glass pane on it.
This one. like this one.
Oh, cool.
So this one is a really special and different one from all those like box painting. So we were thinking, where should we place this? So in the end, we feel like it's the best. In the first window feels like a welcoming opening. So I feel there are lots of like curatorial, like intentionally decision made behind the painting, but those things could happen only because we had a really good working relationship. We can like talk, and after I think only when curator really understand the artist practice, you can then go from there to really try to help the artist to show. Because I think one of the curator's responsibility is really to help artists to tell the story, to help translate that. Because not all the intention the audience can just get by looking at the work. So the exhibition is really a process to help to translate that kind of idea.
That is so interesting.
For
I
example,
feel like
Spotify
those
does
things
too.
for me made the work stronger too by some of the decisions that Yutong suggested. It helped to focus on certain things, and I think that's something that I probably wouldn't have been able to do on my own. So I think those are all things that were just worked out so well.
That's super exciting. That's a really cool opportunity too that differs from being in a curated group show. Like having that solo attention on your work specifically, it's really exciting to hear that kind of encouragement of your artistic voice through the collaboration. That's such an interesting thing to think about.
I love too the talking about it as a triptych, because I feel like in a lot of these like medieval triptychs or something, or even I have a Hieronymus Bosch book in front of me. Speaking of but like speaking of that, like a lot of the times the center panel is usually like this big like a climax of a story kind of in those. So I kind of like the idea that this show can not only be read left to right, but also it has like, if you came up from the other street, it could even have a reverse narrative. You guys
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, I think exactly.
Yeah, so it's got it's
I feel like one thing I learned from like curating exhibition is you should always trust audience that they have the ability, intellectual ability to notice all those small details you designed.
Absolutely, and that's another thing, going back to our current director, Matthew Teitelbaum at the MFA, they're also trying to get away from that, like that we have to talk down to the audience. We don't. Everyone's smart, they get it. Like you just have to give them a few details and they'll be able to figure everything out themselves. And so I think it's very important to just let people come to their own conclusion, because they will. They're not stupid, they'll get it. So I think that's important.
I think the short article that Claire wrote at the Cambridge Day, I forgot the
Yes.
So she was writing about how the sketchbook we show as a first window, the theme echoes through the entire gallery. I'm like, oh my god, she got it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That must be exciting to see.
Yeah, so because there's also like one small sketchbook, you can actually see the sketches of the triptych as the final gallery, third gallery.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
it's very rewarding again to hear that part too. So not only like the reaction that you guys are having, but also, Claire, who wrote this article too. It's just like they're just totally understanding everything about it. So
That's great.
and I love the sketchbook detail too, because they're typically so personal, at least for me. Like you wouldn't want somebody thumbing through them, and for them to just be in that pile, but out of reach, nobody can touch them. So it's kind of like this, like there's kind of some tension there.
And this, interestingly too, that when Yutong asked to see them and looked at them, and she was really interested in them, and so this is actually the first time I've ever publicly shown my sketchbooks, I think, ever in my entire life.
Wow.
So,
That's cool.
yeah.
It's funny too. I was actually walking past the gallery recently with Megan Bernard, who was a curator on the Guston exhibition at the MFA. And we walked by it, and she said, "Oh, Night Studio, that's Philip Guston." And then we saw the book, and we were like, "Oh my gosh!" Could you speak about that tie-in a little bit? Is it because of the way that I know he has a studio that's preserved that was his working studio?
Yeah, it's still there. I don't know that, for costs and things like that, I don't think he's the kind of artist that his estate and his family could keep it as an environment that you could go see. But I know that the places still exist, and I know, that when he passed away, his wife and his daughter Musa spent months and months and months going through his studio, going through the work, and just documenting everything and making sure everything was documented so they knew exactly what everything was. For me, once we started talking, about what we were going to do, I kind of came up with the night studio thing because Philip Guston for me was a huge influence. Not only for his work aesthetic, because he just worked like a dog all the time, like to the detriment of his family, with having problems with his wife and his daughter and things like that, and as she talks about in the book. But so there's that dedication to just, come hell or high water, but also the biggest thing for me that I love about his work is that he had established this whole career, and then in the 60s, he kind of bailed on all that and started doing the mature work that we all know, which is kind of the cartoonish looking figures. And at that time that he did that had to be such a huge step for him to take, because the art world was a very different place back then than it is now. And people were actually saying they were embarrassed for him for the work, showing that work that he had done.
Wow.
And some, even his friend Morton Feldman, who was a composer, they're really, really close friends. He even just said, I can't be your friend anymore. He eventually, after a decade or so, he eventually came back around and was like, he's like, you were right, I was wrong, like that was a mistake to think that way. And he came back and they were befriended again at the end. But that's like, to me, the most kind of admirable thing that he did that. He just did what he thought he needed to do for himself, and he didn't care about what was going to happen in the world. And eventually people did come around. In the beginning, those works did not sell well at all, and after about 10 years of people living with those and seeing them, they realized these things were like, there's nothing else like this out there, and they're so personal and amazing. And then everyone came around just like at the end of his life. And so I think for him, it was probably rewarding to see that people were finally getting it.
Right.
So all those things were just very inspirational to me. And so that's why I decided to kind of go with that. I know Yutong read it too, just before we started.
So I think
Miesemeyer.
Yeah, I think it was our first site visit to that space. So I was asking Brett, is there any particular title you want to title the show? And that's the first thing he said, night studio. So I'm like, yeah, I think that works pretty well with the concept of the show too. I also bought that memoir and I read. It's a really lovely, great memoir written by Philip Guston's daughter. So I feel like in different ways, Night Studio works really well with the concept. Also thinking about how sometimes artists creation process is a very lonely process. You probably don't get understood by people, and you don't even know if people will actually come around or not. So I think there's something else I wanted to say. And also I think the reference to Philip Guston, such a great painter, is really important in this context, because normally you could see Philip Guston's show as an institution where Brett worked at. But we kind of, again, going back to Behind Bay Shadows' mission is we cannot really see Brett's work, who really supported the institution. So I feel like this kind of space we support him.
Right.
So I feel like in a lot of ways this is really a perfect title.
Yeah. I think it adds another layer too to the immersion of the studio space, because it points to the research and the thought that's going into it as well. It really accompanies the sketchbooks and the openness of the desk in a way. Because every artist has books in their studio, I think.
I mean, I think also we wanted it to just also show people that it's not glamorous. Like people think of artists that you're just sitting in your fancy studio with all your assistants and everything. And it's not really, I mean, you guys understand.
I wish you were that way.
But I mean, it's long and hard. You put in tons of hours, like I do anyway. And like I always say, inspiration does not come often for me. So to get around that, I just work my ass off and stumble on happy accidents and mistakes and things like that. And you can only do that by just putting in just tons and tons of hours in the studio. And Philip Guston understood that. I mean, he basically lived his whole life in that studio, and he took his life choice consequences with him, because that's what happens. But painting was that important to him that he would risk everything to try to find those moments. And maybe not to that degree that I would want to risk my life, with my partner and things like that. But, luckily she's very understanding about all this, and she's in their field as well. So I think there's understanding there. But I just really love that dedication, and that what Miesemeyer wrote about in the book is that it's very unglamorous, very, very unglamorous.
Right.
And also how she sometimes feel like her life was overshadowed by her father. So I feel like now, like in a different way, we can give a spotlight to like shadows that people can see.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, she's really an amazing human being if you think about it, because like Yutong is saying, like her young life could not have been much fun because she was always secondary to the family because she was like quote unquote in the way.
Right.
But now she's dedicated her whole life to making sure that his work is seen in the proper way and in the proper context, and that's like a
that's
pretty
a lot of
amazing
work.
human being that can do that. And
Yeah.
she came and spoke at the when we had the opening a couple of years ago, and she's just like an amazingly dedicated person to that. I mean, she has her own life too, but I think her life has been overtaken by this, and she's just done such an admirable job of trying to make sure that his work is seen in the correct light.
Yeah.
Did he pass away tragically, or did he have a
he had health problems later on because he drank voraciously alcohol liquor, ate very unhealthy, smoked like a chimney, just smoked constantly, and so
He's
all
man of
his
his
work.
time.
yeah, right.
Right.
So
yeah,
all those
actually.
things obviously caught up with him near the end. But he had a heart attack and was in the hospital for quite a while, and then he recovered and came out. I think that's when he started working on paper because he couldn't do the big, huge paintings anymore. He wasn't physically able to do it anymore. And then
It's demanding, yeah.
he and his wife were at a friend's house having a dinner, and it's kind of sad, like shocking, and he literally just like put his head down and like passed away, had a heart attack, and that was it, right there at the dinner table. So yeah, kind of depressing. But I mean, not unsurprising considering the kind of life he led. But
Right.
those are the people, that's his life, that's the people, that's the choices they make.
I love the idea too of, his I haven't read this book, but his daughter dealing with feeling overshadowed, but then it seems like she took control of that, and you know what I mean? It kind of seems like it isn't like he continued to overshadow her, but she instead was able to apply her own narrative and lens onto it.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
it's pretty
I think that's what she's
profound.
doing now, and I think the Guston estate is so much more visible right now because of all the work that she's been doing. And I think also a couple of years ago they had created a whole online site now too that I think has everything on there, so you can go and see all of his work.
And when we were talking earlier about the difference between the like artist practical perspective and the curatorial or administrative perspective, that's a good example right there, I think.
Yeah, because most of us, obviously, we don't anyway. I don't have any like clerical, but staff to do all those kinds of things. Like I do it all myself, and Yutong does it all herself. Like all those things that you would have your gallery or other people do. So.
Right. And there's only so many hours in the day, which is a big idea behind the thesis behind VA Shadows.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one thing not a lot of people realize about art history, especially modern art history, is that so many artists are preserved and remembered because of a loved one.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there are these deep, very far historical people that maybe it was like archaeologists or something, but it's almost always a grandchild's parent,
exactly.
spouse. So
Exactly. I mean, sometimes in rare cases when, like we were talking earlier, like when it's a blue chip artist, like a Picasso or somebody like that, or like I think of Brancusi too, he was another kind of Guston-like character in that he literally lived in his studio, and he just lived, breathed, and ate his work all 24/7, and whenever he would sell a piece, he would just be distraught and literally sometimes cry because he didn't want his piece to go, but he would do it because he needed money to survive too. And so he was able to have his whole estate. In fact, it's at the Pompidou in Paris. It's actually in a building on the same property as the Pompidou, but it's right next to it, and you can go see his studio. They cleaned it up a little bit, unfortunately, but it's all... They just took the photographs and everything, and they set everything up like it was when he was there. Wow. So all his tools, many of them handmade. There's speakers, like the speakers he listened to music on. He actually handmade his own speakers and everything.
That's crazy.
Those are there.
Unreal.
He cooked and ate there. He slept there, and so that can happen if you're an artist that has financial means, which I think he had enough at the end of his life that he could go to the state and say, I'll give you all of them, everything, if you do it this way, and then they'll sign the paperwork and all that. And I think that happened again with Monet too, like with the water lily paintings, the big the big huge
with the
panels.
bridge and river.
But even later than that, like the ones that are at the L'Orangerie and places like that, like he gave those to the state as long as they do it the way. So he had say into how the gallery space was designed and everything else while he was still alive. And then if they executed all this, he would give them all that work. And so that's why it's so beautifully preserved and displayed there. So, but that happens very seldom.
That opens up another thought too about the role of museums in cultural preservation. Like, I think ideally everyone who works in the museum field thinks of it this way, but I think we're making more movements into that as we're trying to be more inclusive of other voices and like making sure it actually represents the community that's supposed to be representing. But when we talk about an encyclopedic museum and this idea of a collection representing all cultures of the area that is in, or all trying to represent all cultures of the world, that representation being accurate and being holistic and really working with the communities that they're representing is so important for that reason, because a lot of artists don't have access to an institution that will preserve their work in that way. So I think it's something that should be talked about more for the reasons we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I can only speak to the MFA because that's where I work, but I know other institutions are doing it as well. They really are trying hard to change that and not just have it be all white people or all white males. They're really trying to, like you guys were talking about earlier, so that people that are not white, that are not male, can come in and feel a connection to something and say, hey, that's somebody I can relate to, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Because there are great artists everywhere, in every means, every skin color, every nationality, male, female, everything in between. There are amazing artists everywhere, and they should have a chance to be able to be seen.
And remembered.
And remembered.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, I honestly, this has been an absolutely beautiful episode, and you guys put together such an excellent show.
Right.
Thank you. Thank
So,
you so much.
how long is it up for?
It's up quite a while. It's up till I think May
May.
25th.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I think so.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, go to the 258 Art Space on Linden Street, Harvard Square, at
So
any time of day.
Right. Is there anywhere, any websites you think if the people want to learn more that they should check out for either of you? Or
Well, for me, it's all Instagram. I don't have a website, but my
Me too.
my Instagram handle is at Angell, Angell.
Wonderful.
Well, I have a website, but it's under construction right now. So go to my Instagram. Is Starry, STARRYSYT.
Perfect. And we'll put those in the
Yeah.
episode description
Thank
too.
you guys so much for coming on here. I know
Yeah,
it's
thank
hard
you
to
so
get
much
around
for
the
inviting us.
city, especially in the middle of the day, and
It's raining and
and
windy.
and it can be really taxing. It can be tough to sit and talk about for such a long time. So it takes a rare person to want to participate in something like this, and we appreciate you guys so much for blessing our show.
Thank
No,
you
it's-
so much.
it's really great.
You're very kind and very honored to be on your podcast.
Appreciate it. So yeah, I guess we can leave it there. Wonderful. Okay. It always feels weird to end these.
We're still in the room.
Yeah, we did about.
Boston Art Podcast is an independent DIY production by Brian Huntress and Theodora Earthworms. The information contained in this episode represents the views and opinions of the original creators or our guests, and does not represent any institution, organization, or business. Find us on Instagram at Boston Art Podcast, and tune in for a new episode every Friday. Thank you for listening.